In the quiet corridors of royal life, whispers could ripple farther than any proclamation. A rumor had touched Laura Lopez, Camilla's daughter, threatening to stir old tensions long thought settled. Yet within the palace walls, strength was measured not in headlines but in resilience, in understanding, in the bonds that held a family together. Here, away from public scrutiny, loyalty and love outweighed fleeting controversy. This is the story of a blended family navigating history, rumor, and expectations, finding unity through patience, compassion, and the quiet power of choosing each other every day. Storm in a teacup. In the hushed corridors of power, where a whisper can feel as heavy as a proclamation, a single rumor began to move with unsettling speed. It drifted through Buckingham Palace like a cold current, quiet at first, then growing sharper as it passed from one pair of startled eyes to another. Something had been said about Laura Parker Bowles, something serious enough to unsettle even the most seasoned members of the royal household. Laura, unaware of the gathering tension, sat in her private space far from palace formality. She had always preferred the gentle anonymity of her own quiet world. Art, family, the soft order of everyday life. She was Camilla's daughter, a woman who never sought the spotlight and carefully nurtured a peaceful existence beyond royal scrutiny. Even now, while a storm brewed miles away, she remained steady, following a routine that had nothing to do with crowns, courts, or palace machinery. Inside Buckingham Palace, however, the atmosphere shifted. Staff paused mid-task. Some exchanged glances tinged with worry. Others lowered their eyes, sensing the disturbance without wanting to name it. Rumors always behaved this way, curling into corners, slipping under doors, clinging to the air with a weight that felt disproportional to their substance. But this one struck at a delicate point in the family's structure, threatening to unbalance relationships that had taken years to mend. Camilla's daughter had never been part of the working royal circle. She had built her life deliberately outside it, shaping her identity through art, motherhood, and the grounded simplicity of ordinary days. But her connection to the monarchy, however distant, made her a quiet fixture in the kingdom's tapestry. Any whisper involving her could stretch wider threads. As the rumor continued to gather force behind closed doors, the instinctive palace response came to life. Trusted aides began conferring in low tones. Discreet conversations unfolded in quiet rooms away from open corridors. The entire operation moved with the precision of people who had survived countless storms. Their focus remained absolute: confirm the truth, protect the family, and contain unnecessary distress. It was the rhythm they knew best, honed over generations. Behind the scenes, discussions formed quickly. The rumor lacked substance, no facts, no event, no moment that could justify the weight being assigned to it. It was only a careless spark drifting through a place built entirely of dry wood. Yet even a baseless story could cause damage if not handled with care. Steps were already being taken. Private briefings, measured language, a quiet reinforcement of truth. Let's go deeper into this tale. Laura's life in paint. The London morning unfurled gently across the city, washing the streets in a pale, almost weightless gold. Inside Laura Lopez's gallery, that soft light filtered through tall windows and glided across canvases and sculptures, settling like a blessing over every curated corner. The air held that hushed reverence found only in spaces built for beauty. Laura moved with quiet purpose, adjusting a frame by the slightest fraction. Precision soothed her, steadied her, anchored her far away from the restless world that seemed determined to misunderstand her life. The gallery had always been her refuge. Soft classical music played in the background, threading calm into the silence. Her hands moved with the confidence of a woman who knew this world intimately, the texture of canvas, the stories buried inside color, the emotions tethered to every brushstroke. Pieces waited on the floor, leaning against walls like patient guests preparing for their moment under the lights. This was the realm she had built, a world sculpted with intention and care, untouched by royal protocol, unshaken by outside noise. Her children's laughter seemed to echo softly in her memory. Their photographs dotted the room, tiny frames tucked into corners, playful snapshots pinned above her desk. These images reminded her of everything real, everything grounded, everything that mattered. In this sanctuary, the outside world held no power. Fame had never been her craving, nor had she ever yearned for the ceremonial weight that came with her mother's marriage to the king. She preferred simplicity, authenticity, the kind of life that grew quietly rather than loudly. Her phone buzzed, a soft vibration across the desk. She glanced at the screen, her expression steady, only the faintest tightening around her eyes betraying her reaction. Another whisper circulating in the world beyond these walls. Another rumor twisting itself into shape. Some talk traveled fast in certain circles, blowing swiftly through private rooms and closed doors, gathering momentum despite having no foundation. Laura had learned, almost from childhood, how to let such things drift past her like autumn leaves in a gust. She placed the device face down and returned to the canvas before her. The gallery assistant entered, arms filled with catalogs for the upcoming exhibition. Together they discussed placement, lighting, tone, how a sequence of paintings might guide a visitor's emotions from one piece to the next. Laura listened, thoughtful and focused, aware that even in simplicity there was power. She believed deeply in the art of storytelling, in the quiet truths that visual work could unveil. These details mattered. They reminded her that life, like art, was built in careful layers, not in the shallow noise that occasionally swept around her family. A child's drawing, a wild landscape of crayon forests and lopsided animals, hung proudly on the small refrigerator in her office. She paused before it, warmed by the memory of little hands offering it with unfiltered pride. This, she thought, was the heart of her world. A home filled with love, with small footsteps, with bedtime stories and warm embraces. No rumor could stain that truth. Her thoughts drifted briefly to her husband, Harry. They had shared so many years of steady partnership since their wedding in 2006. Their lives were not perfect, but they were theirs, intentionally crafted, built with gentleness and effort. They had lunch plans later that day, a simple outing, nothing grand or royal. Just two people reconnecting in the middle of a busy week. The thought of it eased the slight tension she carried. Another soft vibration came from the desk. The same rumor moving through private channels, spreading among individuals who often mistook gossip for insight. Yet Laura did not bend. She had learned from her mother's long journey how resilience grew in silence, how calm steadiness often held more power than any public rebuttal. Rumors were shadows. They shifted, distorted, disappeared. Real life remained. Real love endured. The gallery felt even more peaceful as she resumed her work. She stepped back from a newly positioned painting, tilting her head slightly to evaluate its balance. Everything in her life, she realized, was an exercise in balance between presence and privacy, between heritage and independence, between what people assumed and what she truly lived. London bustled outside, unaware of the quiet discipline unfolding within the gallery walls. While whispers traveled elsewhere, palace corridors, private clubs, drawing rooms where speculation fed idle hearts, Laura stayed centered. She refused to give power to echoes. She refused to let something rootless disturb what she had built. The gallery assistant approached once more, handing her a list of final tasks for the day. Laura thanked her with a soft smile and carried the papers to her desk. She reviewed each note, her mind drifting only briefly to thoughts of the king. He would hear the same rumor soon if he hadn't already. She knew his nature, disciplined, measured, a man accustomed to walking through storms with dignified restraint. Their connection had never been one of constant closeness, yet there was a quiet, mutual respect. She simply trusted the calm he would bring, the steadiness that had defined his life of service. The hours slipped by. Light shifted across the floor, warming the gallery in slow ribbons. The rumor remained nothing but that, an empty ripple in a vast sea. It held no truth, no roots, no substance capable of touching the core of who she was. Laura stepped back to admire the nearly finished exhibition layout. A sense of contentment spread through her. This was her real story, not told in headlines, not carved by royal expectation, but shaped with deliberate intention. A life of meaning, built with love and art and quiet strength. She gathered her things, ready to step into the next part of her day. Whatever murmurs waited beyond the gallery doors would be met with the same steady calm she had carried her whole life. Rumors might rise and fade, shadows might stretch and shrink, but Laura, artist, mother, wife, independent soul, remained unshaken, and her world, built carefully in light and truth, would always endure. In the meantime, the tale continues. A king's old shoulders. The morning light slipped cautiously into the king's private study, touching the room with a soft glow that did nothing to ease the knot tightening in his chest. On the polished desk before him lay a folded page, light as paper, heavy as consequence. It wasn't an official report, it wasn't a briefing. It was simply a whisper that had found its way to him through quiet channels, the kind that slid between cracks, passed from one hushed conversation to another until it reached the highest room in the palace. A rumor. 6 carelessly strung together words, baseless, rootless, but sharp enough to wound if left unchecked. King Charles inhaled slowly, letting the memories rise old and tender, filling his thoughts until the rumor itself felt small in comparison. Decades of history unfurled inside him, messy, complicated, human. Moments that had shaped him, moments that had reshaped his family. And woven through them all was Camilla and her children, and the painstakingly built bridge between their separate worlds. His mind drifted back to 2005, a year that had changed everything. The civil ceremony had been quiet and dignified, not wrapped in pomp, but in a kind of mature devotion that belonged only to people who had lived enough life to understand loss and longing. Standing beside Camilla that day, he had felt something rare, peace, fragile yet profound. They had not married young or effortlessly. They had married honestly, with the weight of their histories resting openly between them. Every glance, every subtle touch, carried the accumulated understanding of lives that had been tested, bruised, and ultimately tempered by experience. Yet the world had not greeted their union kindly. The relationship between Charles and Camilla had long been the subject of scrutiny, whispers, and moral judgment. What began as companionship in the midst of sorrow had evolved into a deep, enduring love, but one that arrived under the shadow of controversy. The public had long compared them to an impossible ideal, scrutinizing past choices, perceived betrayals, and even the timing of their happiness. For decades, Charles had carried not only the burden of expectation as heir to the throne, but also the weight of a marriage that ended in heartbreak, leaving scars that would never fully fade. Camilla had endured as well, facing relentless criticism, subtle social exclusion, and endless commentary on her character and intentions. Theirs was a love story shaped as much by endurance as by affection, by surviving judgment as much as by seeking joy. Blending their families only added layers of complexity. His children had watched from a distance, processing change, feeling uncertainty, and guarding their own emotions carefully. Camilla's children carried their own histories of adjustment, loyalty, and wariness. Bringing these threads together had required extraordinary care. It demanded patience, humility, and a willingness to move slowly enough for trust to take shape. Not rushing affection or expectation, but allowing bonds to form at their own pace. Every shared meal, every tentative conversation, every carefully navigated family gathering became a small act of reconciliation. Love alone could not bridge decades of history, scandal, and human imperfection. Grace had to intervene, quietly, persistently, shaping the contours of a family that had been forged in public gaze yet sought private coherence. Even in those early days, standing beside Camilla, Charles had understood the subtle victories hidden in these moments of connection. a shared laugh, a hesitant compliment, a sign of trust emerging where suspicion had once lived. Their union had never been simple, never been purely celebrated, but it had endured, quietly defying expectation and proving that genuine commitment often required surviving the harshest judgments before it could flourish in peace. He remembered those early dinners vividly, awkward at times, careful, gentle. Tom, with his dry humor that arrived unexpectedly, slicing through stiffness like a well-timed breeze. Laura, with her quiet, watchful presence, an artist's gaze that always seemed to absorb more than she ever said aloud. They were adults with independent lives, not children in need of direction. He had understood that immediately. They required respect more than guidance, understanding more than authority. And so he took his time. He listened more than he spoke. He observed the tiniest shifts, the softening around Laura's eyes when she felt comfortable, the ease in Tom's posture when laughter came naturally. Camilla held it all together, smoothing edges with the gift she had always possessed, the ability to create warmth from tension, to draw people gently toward one another without ever forcing the connection. Charles remembered one particular moment, a quiet breakthrough, one that held no fanfare. Laura had shown him an art catalog she had curated, her voice steady, her passion evident in every thoughtful description. He had realized then how deeply she loved her world, how her life was built in layers of creativity, independence, and intention. Not a life lived in royalty's reflection, a life lived entirely on her own terms. He had admired that deeply. Tom, too, had carved his own path, utterly separate from royal expectations. Charles had watched both siblings grow, not in age, but in the subtle widening of trust. And slowly, without ceremony, they had become family. Which was why the rumor stung, not because of public perception, but because it threatened the delicate, hard-won harmony they had created. He felt an ache at the thought of Laura being swept into something she had never asked for. She had kept her distance from royal noise. She had chosen quiet living, meaningful work, and the sanctuary of her own carefully shaped world. She did not deserve to be pulled into whispers that belonged to no truth. Yet even now he knew how his family would respond. Laura would keep steady. She always did. Her life was too grounded in authenticity to be rattled by passing speculation. She had 3 children, a loving marriage, and a thriving career. She understood the weight of privacy, understood that silence was sometimes the strongest armor. Tom would hear the rumor and roll his eyes, likely turning it into a sarcastic remark that would make Camilla laugh despite herself. His humor had always been a shield, and often a balm for the rest of them. And Camilla, steady, warm, unshakable Camilla, would rise above it all with the grace she had mastered across decades of scrutiny. She knew rumors better than most. She had walked through storms that might have shattered a weaker person. She had rebuilt herself with patience, surviving waves of misunderstanding until the world finally saw her as she truly was, a woman of resilience, warmth, and quiet strength. Charles set the folded paper aside. It meant nothing. Not in comparison to the memories playing softly through his mind, the lunches shared with Laura and Harry, the surprising depth of Tom's insights during late-evening conversations, the easy laughter during holiday gatherings where titles dissolved and only family remained. This was the truth of them, messy, human, beautiful, a blended family formed not by obligation but by willingness, by years of trying, by countless small moments that had slowly knitted them together. He leaned back, letting the morning settle around him. The rumor would be handled discreetly. It would fade like all unrooted things eventually did. What remained was what mattered. The family they had become. The people they had chosen to be for one another. His world had seen wars, political upheavals, shifting eras, public upheaval, but family remained his quiet anchor. Camilla's unwavering heart. These were the constants that no whispered words could undo. The paper lay untouched now, irrelevant. Charles's thoughts were elsewhere, held steady by memory, shaped by love, grounded in the truth of the family he had spent years nurturing. And as the morning deepened over London, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Rumors might swirl, shadows might stretch, but the core of their family, strong, unlikely, deeply bonded, would endure. Always. Stay tuned for more. A Mother's Guard. The sitting room had always been a place of refuge, a quiet chamber tucked deep within the palace where the world's noise softened and the family's truest selves emerged. Its walls held echoes of laughter, disagreements, reconciliations, and long conversations that would never appear in any historical record. This morning, however, the calm had a tremor beneath it, a subtle shift in the air that signaled trouble threading its way toward the family's private life. Camilla moved through the room with a measured steadiness that only came from years of surviving storms. Not the loud kind filled with clamor and spectacle, but the slow, creeping ones that began as whispers drifting through corridors. A rumor had reached them, sharp enough to unsettle but flimsy enough to dismiss. Still, she knew such things carried a way of slipping into vulnerable spaces, stirring anxieties that should have remained sleeping. Her expression was calm, but her movements carried an underlying urgency, a mother's urgency. Her phone rested on the table after a morning of discreet alerts. Not from news outlets, not from reporters, not from the public, from private channels, from trusted individuals who knew when something potentially harmful had begun to circulate. Camilla had not built her strength from reacting quickly, but from reacting correctly. Patience had been her lifelong discipline. She would not let worry dictate her next steps. Laura's name pulsed quietly in her thoughts. Her daughter had always walked a delicate line, close enough to understand the royal world, distant enough to avoid being swallowed by it. She had never wanted fame, never wanted titles. She had forged her life with gentle stubbornness, choosing meaning over recognition. An art curator with an eye for emotion, a mother devoted to her children, a woman who had shaped her own world far away from palace echo chambers. The rumor touching her name felt like a trespass, an intrusion into a life that had been intentionally built without royal scaffolding. Camilla reached for the secure palace phone. Her instinct guided her. The first call would be to Laura. She wasn't planning a strategy. She wasn't preparing a defense. She simply needed to hear her daughter's voice, to offer the quiet reassurance only a mother could give, though the words themselves would remain unspoken. The connection between them ran deeper than reassurance. It lived in shared resilience, in the understanding forged from years of weathering complexities that outsiders would never comprehend. Legal minds were already on standby, not because the rumor carried weight, but because royal life required a constant readiness. In their world, perception mattered almost as much as truth. Every careless whisper had potential consequences if ignored. Camilla wasn't frightened, but she was alert, protective, sharpened. The instincts of a queen consort merged with the instincts of a mother, forming an unshakable resolve. She glanced up at Charles across the room. He stood near the window, shoulders slightly tense beneath the morning light. He had always carried the burdens of responsibility with a quiet heaviness, but this was different. The rumor had not wounded his pride as a monarch. It had grazed his heart as a stepfather. Over the years, his relationship with Laura and Tom had been a journey, not a given. He had approached them with care, aware that love could not be demanded, only earned. And earn it he had, through steady presence and gentle understanding. Seeing Laura pulled into something baseless stirred an anger he seldom revealed. Camilla watched him with a tenderness she rarely allowed to surface publicly. She knew his thoughts even without hearing them. Laura was part of their family, not by decree, but by choice and affection. Any harm directed toward her was harm directed toward all of them. Her own mind moved through memories, tracing the difficult, beautiful road that had led them here. The early years of blending their families had been a delicate dance, a balancing act of respect and patience. Laura had been cautious, guarded in the presence of institutions that had once threatened to overshadow her mother. Tom had navigated the dynamic with humor sharp enough to slice through awkwardness. Slowly, they had become a unit, not perfect, not seamless, but real. The kind of real that endured. Tom would almost certainly react to the rumor with the same wry humor he applied to every inconvenience life tossed at him. He had inherited his mother's dry wit, and Camilla could already imagine the remark he'd make privately to ease the tension. Laura, by contrast, would greet the disturbance with her usual calm, continuing with her responsibilities rather than letting shadows dictate her day. Their resilience, learned through years of public adjacency, was one of the many reasons Camilla cherished them. The palace would respond quietly and efficiently. Protocol demanded it. Legal advisors would examine the rumor. Communications staff would be briefed only insofar as necessary. Every action would be subtle, refined, tailored to preserve dignity without drawing unnecessary attention. But beneath all that machinery stood the true barrier between rumor and reality, the unity of their family. Laura's children flashed through Camilla's mind, bright, lively, growing in a world where their grandmother was queen. Yet their daily lives remained refreshingly ordinary. Camilla felt a fierce protectiveness in her chest, a determination to shield them from the ripple effects of adult nonsense. Each generation deserved the chance to grow without being swept into the vortex of royal speculation. Charles approached her then, and his hand found hers. No words passed between them, yet the exchange was full. They had faced storms heavier than this one. They knew how to move together, how to silence fear before it found a foothold. Side by side, they formed the heart of a family that had fought hard for its peace. Camilla began her calls, each one crafted with care, each one reinforcing boundaries, each one laying a quiet, protective web around those she loved. She was precise, deliberate, confident. Rumors had no power here, not in this room, not in this family. Laura would continue her work, her art, her motherhood, her independence. She would not be shaken. She had been raised to stand firm in truth, and she always had. The rumor was just a passing shadow. Their family was the constant. In the gentle hush of the sitting room, Camilla felt her resolve solidify. She was a queen, yes, but in this moment she was something far greater. A mother guarding her own. The day would move forward, the murmur would fade, but their bond, quiet, steadfast, unbreakable, would outlast every whisper. And here is where the fact comes clean. The unraveling truth. James Hartley had learned long ago that in the halls of power, truth rarely arrived with noise. It moved quietly, almost shyly, slipping between the cracks of speculation and settling only where patience made room for it. Rumors, however, behaved differently. They spread with the speed of panic, darting through private corridors, whispered across polished tables, drifting between individuals who should have known better than to repeat what they did not understand. He sat at his desk in the private secretary's suite, a room known for its stillness even during the most chaotic periods of royal life. Papers lay arranged in precise stacks, each one a fragment of the latest rumor involving Laura Lopez. No one outside the palace knew the details yet, and no one within had any intention of letting the whispers escape into public view. For now, the unverified claims existed only in silent conversations, passed between aides, civil servants, and a handful of political figures who had heard enough to grow curious, but not enough to speak openly. One particular whisper had started the chain reaction, a suggestion of wrongdoing tied loosely, far too loosely, to Laura. It was vague, inconsistent, and suspiciously convenient. When James requested supporting details through confidential channels, what came back were fragments. A date that did not align. A witness whose recollection wavered. A supposed document that, upon discreet verification, appeared to be nothing more than a poorly assembled fabrication. In a secluded parliamentary corridor, an MP voiced faint concerns to a colleague, both speaking so quietly their words barely rose above the shuffle of papers. But even in that protected environment, the moment the MP was pressed for specifics, the allegation collapsed on itself. Too many holes, not enough structure. a rumor wearing the clothes of importance but lacking the body to fill them. James updated the palace legal council, not because there was real danger, but because truth deserved guardianship. Royal legal teams moved with the sharp precision of seasoned professionals. Quiet notices were drafted. Internal communications were prepared to address anyone attempting to further spread the unverified story. The palace did not fight rumors loudly, it dissected them silently. Behind the scenes, James ensured every possible angle was examined. Security logs were reviewed, not as a dramatic gesture but as a due diligence measure. Access records proved clean, staff testimonies aligned. Communication histories showed nothing unusual. Every scrap of verifiable truth worked in Laura's defense, which reassured everyone involved, though reassurance had never been in short supply. Meanwhile, individuals who had initially passed along the rumor privately began stepping back from their claims. Their stories shifted, softened, or changed entirely. One forgot a detail. Another remembered a different version. A third admitted to having repeated only what someone else had suggested in confidence. Rumors, when pressed, often crumbled like old parchment. James had seen this pattern before. He remembered the countless instances throughout royal history where sensational whispers had bloomed in the dark only to wither under scrutiny. What mattered most in these situations was stability, a calm center, and the family already possessed that. Charles remained controlled, quietly protective, quietly focused. Camilla, though concerned, moved with the grace of someone who had survived storms far greater than this one. She trusted the truth. She trusted her daughter. She trusted the quiet competence of the staff working behind the scenes to dismantle the rumor piece by piece. Laura, insulated by her independence, continued her work with serene determination. She curated exhibitions. She returned home to her husband and children. She lived her life with the same quiet dignity she had always shown. The rumor barely grazed her. Her reality was stronger. As the week unfolded, the energy behind the rumor weakened. The inconsistencies grew too large to ignore. Those who had whispered now found themselves facing gentle but firm questioning. And under that pressure, the truth began to surface. Someone, a disgruntled figure with a taste for disruption, had pieced together a chain of false implications, hoping it would spiral into something larger. They had underestimated the palace's ability to trace motivations, connections, and digital fingerprints. By the time James compiled the final report, the truth stood unshakably clear. The rumor had no foundation. Its source had been identified and handled through appropriate legal channels. Its reach had been contained. Its credibility had collapsed entirely. James felt a quiet satisfaction as he closed the final folder. The family had not needed theatrics. They had not needed public displays of strength. They had simply trusted in truth and allowed it to move at its own deliberate pace. Beyond the palace walls, life continued unchanged. Laura's gallery doors remained open. Charles and Camilla carried on their duties with steady resolve. Within the private chambers of the royal household, the feeling was unmistakable, not triumph, but quiet endurance. The rumor had fallen away. The family endured. The truth prevailed as it always did, not loudly but confidently. And in the quiet heartbeat of the palace, unity remained the final word. Stay with us as the tale takes a hidden turn. Keep watching for more. A prince's reflection. The photograph caught William off guard, an old image of his father, of Camilla, a reminder of the tangled history that had shaped his entire life. The new rumor swirling around Laura wasn't just noise, it prodded wounds he had spent years trying to seal. The past never stayed buried for long in his world. It always found its way back. He remembered those difficult years after his mother's death, the turbulence, the anger, the feeling that everything safe had been pulled apart. Camilla's arrival in their lives was not gentle. She came wrapped in controversy, in tension, in history William wasn't ready to confront. Her presence had forced a painful shift. It demanded acceptance long before healing had even begun. Biographers had spent years writing about the strain, the cold dinners, the clipped conversations, the long silences that said more than words ever could. He and Harry had tiptoed through a battlefield of loyalty and resentment. For Charles and Camilla, love had never been the problem. The world around them was. Their union required negotiation, courage, and wounds that time alone could soften. And through all of it, Laura had been pulled into the chaos, not by her own choices, but by the simple misfortune of being born into a story that wasn't hers. She didn't grow up in the spotlight, but suddenly the spotlight followed her anyway. Early whispers painted a picture of tense introductions, emotional friction. Two families adjusting to each other awkwardly, clumsily, and under the weight of history neither side could erase. As he grew older, William learned what he couldn't understand in his youth, that families are messy, that the truth is rarely tidy, that forgiveness is a long process, sometimes years long. Camilla's children were never rivals. They were just part of a new, complicated shape his family had to grow into. But the rumor now swirling around Laura dragged old memories to the surface. It wasn't the claim itself that stung. It was the echo, the way lies had once reshaped his world, bruised his mother's legacy, twisted his own story. The same patterns repeated themselves if given the tiniest opening. His first reaction was a familiar heat of anger. Protective, sharp. The old instinct to confront the narrative before it grew teeth. But he knew better now. He had learned the cost of reacting too quickly, the price of giving oxygen to fabrications. Silence was not weakness. It was strategy. A refusal to play the game. He thought of Laura, her quiet life, her work, her children. A woman who had deliberately avoided royal chaos, who built a world defined not by titles but by art, by color, by beauty. She didn't deserve to be dragged into the shadows of a past she hadn't created. Memories drifted back, awkward early gatherings, conversations that went nowhere, tension that sat between them like an invisible guest. But slowly over the years, irritation softened into understanding. Distance dissolved into familiarity. The blended family they never asked for somehow became real. Imperfect, but real. William had lived too long under the weight of other people's stories. He had learned how narratives were twisted, how rumor could crush reputations, how speculation could become truth simply because it was repeated loudly enough. He had watched it destroy his mother, hurt his wife, follow his brother. Now it attempted to strike at someone who had always tried to stay clear of the storm. He would not let that happen again. He returned his gaze to the photograph, his father in younger years smiling in a way he rarely did now, Camilla beside him, Laura and Tom in the background, a strange, stitched-together portrait of a modern royal family. Not polished, not flawless, but undeniably theirs. He understood something now that he had once resisted, that family did not always come in the shape you expected. Sometimes it arrived battered, complicated, born from old wounds, but connection was a choice, one you made again and again, even when it wasn't easy. So he chose silence, calm, stability, not because he didn't care, but because caring required restraint. It required refusing to let lies breathe. Laura was family, not a perfect addition, not a seamless fit, but family all the same. The rumor would fade, just as others had. The storm would lose momentum, and what would remain was the quiet truth that healing had taken years, and he would not allow old ghosts to undo it. He set the photograph down gently. The world could talk. The whispers could rise. But he knew what mattered. He knew who mattered. A prince standing not in anger, but in understanding. A man choosing peace over noise. A family still holding, still growing, still moving forward. Keep watching. And if you've been intrigued so far, please hit the like button. Family bond renewed. The family room held a sacred stillness, the kind that settled deep into the walls, into the memories, into the people who walked through it. Afternoon light slipped in soft beams across the carpet, illuminating a space that had watched generations rise, falter, reconcile, and rise again. King Charles stepped inside quietly, not with the stride of a monarch, but with the weight and tenderness of a father whose world had once again shifted around the people he loved. Laura sat by the window, her posture calm but thoughtful, her youngest child's drawing spread beside her like a burst of color in an otherwise serious day. She had always brought color into the quiet corners of this family, sometimes without even noticing it. An art curator, a mother, a woman who had learned with slow patience how to navigate the delicate boundaries of a life connected to royalty without surrendering her independence. Charles paused for a moment, watching her. The past week had been unsettling. A rumor, nothing more, nothing less, had hovered like a shadow over her name. But shadows could not dim the truth of a life so solid, so rooted in sincerity. He spoke softly then, his voice low and warm, saying that people often failed to understand the true measure of strength. He explained that it was never rooted in titles or crowns, but in the way a person lived and in the world they built with their own hands. Laura's gaze softened at his words. Before she could respond, Camilla reached for her hand, a simple gesture carrying years of history, the bond of mother and daughter, the delicate complexity of blended families, and the instinctive need to shield the ones she loved most. Camilla's touch was quiet but purposeful, silently reassuring Laura that she was not alone, not now and not ever. William stood near the mantelpiece, watching everything without a word. The confrontation from earlier had stripped away the usual layers of formality, revealing something more vulnerable beneath it. What had first appeared as anger now looked more like concern, and what had once seemed like distrust had softened into the fragile layering of old wounds, slowly giving way to understanding. Charles turned toward him briefly, acknowledging the shift, before continuing to address Laura with the heartfelt pride of a father who had watched his family bend, stretch, and somehow remain unbroken. He told her she had built a life completely outside the structures surrounding them, a life shaped by her own decisions, her own strength, her own sense of meaning. He insisted that this stood as her greatest achievement. In the quiet that followed, a child's laughter floated in from the next room. Laura's children played freely, blissfully unaware of how close the rumor had come to brushing against their world. Their innocence cut through the tension like a fresh breeze, grounding everyone in what truly mattered. William's expression softened even further. He remembered how rumors had carved into his own childhood, how whispers had once shaped the entire narrative of his mother's life. That memory fed a fierce protectiveness toward his father, toward the family they had collectively become, and unexpectedly toward Laura herself. The path from resentment to understanding had never been quick or simple. Families like theirs didn't heal in neat lines. They healed in cautious steps, in quiet stumbles, and through the stubborn choice to keep showing up for one another. Camilla watched her son and daughter standing there, a quiet relief warming her features. She had spent years trying to weave these threads together, balancing the children she had raised with the children she had inherited. She understood better than anyone how delicate such a moment truly was. Charles added gently that living outside the royal fold was not a disadvantage but a kind of freedom, the freedom to choose one's own voice, one's own direction. Laura smiled then, a small and sincere curve that held gratitude rather than triumph. And something shifted in the room, something light, something long overdue. The tension that had lingered for years loosened. The air felt easier, as if the rumor had not torn them apart, but instead revealed how strongly they were already woven together. A simple dinner waited downstairs. Not a formal banquet, not a royal performance, just a meal shared between people who had been weathered by life and rumor and expectation and were still choosing each other. William stepped closer to Laura. No apology, no ceremony, just a nod, quiet, respectful, symbolic. Their version of a handshake across old divides. The monarchy endured not because of perfection, but because of moments like this, where humanity mattered more than lineage, where love mattered more than protocol. Camilla's smile deepened, a mother's pride, a queen's understanding. Charles looked around the room and saw not a monarchy but a family stitched together by choice as much as by blood. Imperfect, complicated, beautiful. The rumor had faded, but love hadn't. A child's laughter rang again. A colorful drawing rested on the chair. The afternoon light warmed the room. Not royal, just family. Tell us what you think of this story. Have Laura and William made their peace? What does the future hold for her in this royal fantasy? Share your thoughts below, and if this tale stirred something in you, share with us in the comment. Let the story of life and legends encourage us to live our best moments.